So I thought I'd make this recording. I'm guessing I'll have to give it a interesting name in order for it to even be seen amongst all of the chatter and all of the cruft, as we say in my field. I probably will not even post this. I probably will not even send it. But I thought I would at least create some audio and see how it comes out. And if I'm led, I will go ahead and post it. But I do feel this like little bit of conviction. So yesterday I was reading in Ezekiel, and I believe it was, actually I started in the 4th chapter and I bumped back because I was going through a Bible study with somebody. And so I jumped back to Ezekiel 1. And I hate to say this is horrible to admit, but I guess I will. I've been a Christian almost all my life. And I've read the New Testament cover to cover, and I've read much of the Old Testament cover to cover. But there are some passages that I had never seen before in all my life. I haven't read cover to cover to cover to cover, every single word. And Ezekiel, all of it was one of those things that I had not read before. So I was reading some passages that I'd never seen before. And I was like, whoa. And as I was reading them, I couldn't get past this parallel comparison in my mind, the back of my mind, between what Ezekiel was saying in those first couple of chapters especially, and Joshua, Brother Joshua. God called Ezekiel and he told him, he said, I'm calling you and I want you to do these things and tell your people these things over here. And all the things that he had him do were like symbolic. Everything was symbolic. You're going to do this and this symbolizes that. You do this and this symbolizes that judgment. And everything was just that. I found that very interesting. But what I found even more interesting was what God told Ezekiel. He said, you go talk to the people and don't you worry about what they say, about how they react, about whether they hear you or whether they don't hear you. You just do what I'm telling you to do. Don't bother yourself or concern yourself with how they react. You do what I'm telling you to do. And every time I read that, I thought about Joshua, because that's what he's done. He has done exactly what he believes the Lord has told him to do. No matter what anybody says, no matter what anybody thinks, no matter whether or not he is tickling somebody's ears that want to hear what he has to say or whether he's not, he doesn't care. When he came on the sentence this last time, I was amazed at what he said and the way he presented it, because he didn't back off of anything. He basically said, I told you it's going to happen on the 23rd and the 24th, and that's when it's going to happen of 2025, even though those dates had passed, right, on the Gregorian calendar. He said that flat out to everybody's face before he even explained anything about the calendars, which probably a lot of people who were watching him hadn't heard yet. To their face, he said it. And of course, the reaction of the Sent Twins probably reflected reactions of everybody else who was hearing him at the time. They were flabbergasted. Like, how can you say that? The dates have already passed. What are you talking about? And the fact that he looked at them and was just as dogmatic as he had ever been. You can look at that multiple ways. I saw Jesus in that. I'm not saying anything bad about the Sent Twins. I just discovered them, right? And I really enjoy their podcast. So I'm not saying anything bad about them. But when I say that it reminds me of the way Jesus interacted with the Pharisees, he would tell them things to their face, whether they wanted to hear it or whether they didn't. And by the time he got done talking to them, their mouths were stopped. They couldn't say anything. They couldn't say yay. They couldn't say nay. They couldn't deny what he said. And it made them angry. It made them angry. Think about when he said, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. How do you argue with that? Right? Are you going to pick up a stone? It's up to you what you want to do, how you want to handle it. But in every case, in every interaction with them, he stopped their mouths. And he looked at them and he spoke to them like a man who didn't care what they thought, how much they hated him, how much they wanted to just leap on him in a moment and take his life. He didn't care. He just stood fast and said what needed to be said. And that's what I saw in Joshua there. And I watched as the demeanor of the Centurions that were interviewing him went from being sheer skepticism, understandably, right, to blown away again at the very end. One of them said, Jesus, help us. So I see something spiritual in that. I do. And I can't deny that. I do. And so that pretty much floored me when I was reading Ezekiel and comparing the two, because there did appear to me to be a real parallel there. But he also told Ezekiel, he said, now I'm going to send you to these people. He said, if there's somebody that's wicked and you don't warn them so that they have a chance to repent and change their way and be saved, if you don't warn them and they die in their wickedness, yes, they will be destroyed, but their blood is going to be on your hands. That's what he told him. Their blood is going to be on your hands because you didn't warn them. I was like, whoa. And then he said, now, if you do warn them and they still don't heed the warning and they die in their wickedness, they will be destroyed and you are in the clear. Your soul is clean. You're clear. And when I read that to myself, I thought, what a tremendous burden it is when somebody has a word that they believe from the top of their head to the soles of their feet came from the Lord God Almighty. The kind of burden that they have. Look at Ezekiel. God told him, I'll require it of you if you don't warn them. How else can you respond other than to go out there and deliver the warning and take all the slings and arrows? There is no other response. And the fact that Joshua is standing tall in the midst of this storm just proves to me all the more, I think he's the real deal. I think he's the real deal. Anyway, segue. Another reason why I think he's the real deal is because of something that happened to me that may not mean anything to anyone else. I look at some of the confirmations that I've seen online and I'm like, ooh, okay. Yep, I'm glad you got something out of that because I'm not feeling it, right? No casting of any dispersions. Confirmations are very personal to every single person, right? But so far, I've only seen a few that I consider to be completely, massively whiz-bang confirmations. One was this guy, I think was his name, I forget his last name, his first name, it started with a J. Anyway, he's in construction, and he had 2 calendars. He had 2 calendars. This is before the 23rd and 24th. He had 2 calendars written out where he does all of his work, schedules all of this stuff. He has a rough draft and he has a final copy. And he was scheduling out some work, right, for his guys. He's a contractor, scheduling out his work, writing things on the calendar. We're going to do this on this date, this on this date, this on this date. And then he left his office for a little bit. He came back. And in his absence, somebody had written on the calendar, Rapture, with pictures of a trumpet, 23 and 24. And they had written something else on one of the previous dates as well. And he said, I didn't write that. I talked to my guys. They didn't write it. My office, I keep locked. Nobody came in here. Who wrote that? That to me gave me pause. It gave me pause, right? Things like that. It's like, ooh, yeah, that's interesting. Anyway, the personal confirmation that I had, let's see, this is 2025, so it would have been 12 years ago in 2013. I was sitting at work and just, at my desk, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, I had 3 numbers pop up into my spirit, into my mind, very, very clearly. Never had that happen before in life that I can recall. Just very clearly. It wasn't audible, but I knew I'd heard these 3 numbers. There was no context provided for them. No nothing other than 3 numbers. And at the time, I I didn't know much about. I mean, I'd been a Christian for a while, but there were things many things that I didn't understand then that I understand better now. But I did have the presence of mind to write it down. I was like, I don't even know what this is, but maybe one day I will. So I opened up my phone and opened up the Notepad application and stuck it in there, right, on a page. I've since swapped phones or upgraded my phone one or two times since then. And I just, you back up your data, you bring it back on, and the numbers went with me, right? And every once in a while, through the course of the years, I would look at those numbers. Like, do they make any sense now? Nope, they don't make any sense. Oh, I had this thing happening in my life now, 5 years later. Let me look at those numbers. Do they make any sense now? No, they don't make any sense. And that happened, periodically over the years. And then I heard about Brother Joshua. And I heard what he said about 9:23, 9:24. And it had been a while since I looked at those numbers. And I was like, what did I write down again? What did I write down? I went back and looked, and I was like, no, I didn't write down 9:23. And I didn't write down 9:24. And I was hoping that I had, because I was seeing all these confirmations, right? People seeing license plates and all this stuff. I was like, ooh, maybe that's what I wrote down. I was like, no, that's not what I wrote down. What I had written down was 937. 937. And I was like, well, that doesn't really mean anything in this context. But I couldn't just put it away like I had before, because I kept thinking this is pertinent somehow. Somehow this is pertinent now. It finally is the time for me to pull these numbers out and really figure out what they mean. So I started turning it over in my head. What 937? What could that mean? Well, we know it ain't 923. We know it ain't 924. And we know there are not 37 days in a month, right? But maybe 923 is a reference point, because that was the day that everybody was focused on. That's where the confirmations were, 923, right? I was like, maybe 923 is a reference point. Well, what's the difference between 923 and 937? 14. It's 14. So before 923 even came, right? Before it even happened or didn't happen, I was curious about that 14-point difference. So a couple days before, I said, well, what is 914? What is 923 plus 14 days? Where does that take us? Oh, it takes us to October 7th. Okay. And at the time, I was like, well, what's special about October 7th? What happens on October 7th? And I went into Copilot, and I said, hey, Copilot, what happens on October 7th? And I found out that there is a Jewish feast several days long that is happening during October 7th. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. It doesn't really mean much to me in the context of what we're talking about, but it is interesting, right? And then I forgot about it. But, well, I shouldn't say that. I didn't forget about it. I kept wondering about those 14 days in October 7th, because every once in a while, I'd be looking at something and I'd hear something about 14 this or 14 that or 14 days. And I'm like, I don't know. Well, then when the whole calendar thing was revealed, right? I was listening to Bro Scott's YouTube that explained the whole thing, that kind of started the whole understanding of everything. And I was looking at this video and I paused it when he was explaining the difference and how the days were off. I paused it right before he gave the number of days that the two calendars were off. And I said out loud, I bet you he's going to say they're off by 14 days. How much you want to bet? And then I unpaused it. And he said they were off by 13 days. 13 days. I go, okay, that's close, right? Well, then I found out that the full moon is supposed to happen on October 6th, but it's going to happen like 11:30 or so in the evening, right? So by the time the clock clicks over to the 14th day, it'll still be a full moon. And it will still be, that full moon will still be the 6th and the 7th. And people are talking about one of those 2 days, the 6th and the 7th. So to me, that 14th day, October 7th, is very, very much in play. So saying all that to say that to me was a big confirmation, especially since it came way before any of us knew about Brother Joshua, right? It came 12 years ago. And I've been holding it and having it in my phone all these years, ready to pull out whenever it made sense. And now for the first time, it makes sense. And it makes sense in the context of the switched calendars. So that's what I wanted to post. Am I positive 100%? No, right? Why am I not positive 100%? Because of the same reason why I wasn't positive 100% before. Because when it comes to the prophetic, as human beings, we often see in part, right? And it's not that the prophecy was wrong, it's that we didn't know how to interpret it. And you always, in my mind, you always have to make allowances for that. Case in point, for those of you who've heard of King Clement, you will know that he was the real deal. He was definitely a prophet of God. I mean, he had prophecies that came true, that he prophesied decades in advance, right? Very, very well known in Christian circles. He had prophecies about Donald Trump all the way starting from 2007, I believe was his first prophecy, if I'm not mistaken. All the way from 2007 until, I think 2014 might have been the last one. And one of those prophecies that he said was that Trump would have 2 terms. And there were a lot of people in Christian circles that knew about that prophecy, and they had a lot of confidence in Kim Clement as being the real deal, because believe me, there are a lot of non-real deals out there. We know that. But he was the real thing. And so people were wondering, well, when 2020 happened, people were like, well, wait, Kim Clement said that he was going to get 2 terms. And then, apparently the prophecy was false and he was false for saying it and blah, 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 right? Some people might have been in the camp of, okay, the prophecy was false, he was wrong. But then there were other people that were in the camp of, well, wait a minute, maybe we misunderstood it. And then, of course, it occurred to people, wait a minute, he never said there were going to be consecutive terms. He just said he was going to have 2 terms. And then once that understanding came into play, there was a lot of confidence in the Christian community that 2024 was going to go the way it went. Because they knew that Kim Clement was the real deal, and they knew he had said two terms, and they knew by then, they're not going to be consecutive. And then boom, 2024 happened. That's what I mean about a prophecy being true, but just not being understood until it's closer to the time for it to be fulfilled. So, all that said, am I 100% sure? No, I'm not. But I am definitely looking. I'm definitely looking, right? And there ain't nothing wrong with that. Okay, thanks for listening. Take care. God bless.